All right, y'all, welcome back to Common Arms channel. All right, so today we're checking out something about the Battle of Britain. Now, I've heard a lot about the Battle of Britain. However, I've never actually reacted to a video dedicated to it. Now, today we're checking out one from the Armchair Historian. We already know they do some great stuff. This is actually one of their older videos, so I'm surprised I haven't seen it yet. But hopefully it gives us some pretty good background. It's more specifically titled, How Was the Battle of Britain Won? Which is interesting because, again, I've seen and heard a lot about it, but I don't really know. I couldn't really explain this if somebody asked me. So, yeah, should be a good one. Let's get into it. Man, their animations have come far, I gotta say. Pretty cool, though. Kind of like the style of it.
The Battle of Britain was the first large-scale military campaign in history to be fought exclusively in the air. And according to many leading historians, the confrontation nearly brought Britain to its knees, an outcome that undoubtedly would have had a significant influence on the course of the Second World War. I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian, and today I'll be explaining why the Battle of Britain was fought and how the British were able to best their German foes. But first, a word from our sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is a realistic, free-to-play... The angry buzzing of the planes increased, and the bombs rained down, literally rained down. We hugged the side of the building.
That's terrifying. Especially for a place like London.
Now the fires appeared. A large bomb dropped across the river, burst in a brilliant orange, and then spurted high into the air. There were warehouses over there. One by one they caught fire. The fire engines clanged sharply, and then the air was filled with a great hissing as the water met the flames.
Wow, that was a really solid quote to sort of explain it from, somebody on the ground. Because again, it's really like trippy to think about it in modern time, but also just where you live. Like these planes coming in and just destroying everything, places that you have known for potentially your whole life, especially for like people who lived in London. Yeah, it's a very odd thing. I know when I actually went to London and I still saw some of the buildings that had like, bullet holes and whatnot in them. It was kind of surreal because, we have places in the US that have bullet holes, but that's kind of like, self-made kind of stuff. But yeah, something like that, especially at this sort of scale, is really weird to wrap my mind around, especially like for a World War II conflict. So the fact that he started it with a quote to sort of describe it, I think was a really nice touch.
This was the experience of Quentin Reynolds, as recounted in Gavin Mortimer's book, The Longest Night. Events such as these were commonplace by the spring of 1941, but by this time the Blitz, as it came to be known, was drawing to a close. It had been 7 months since air combat between Germany and Britain intensified, and the situation was looking grim. Reynolds states that London remained the center of the free world's resistance to Hitler's Germany, but its all-in-together camaraderie was disintegrating. The city's civil defenses were chronically undermanned, as the breezy enthusiasm of those who volunteered in 1939 cracked under the incessant bombing. So how did Britain arrive at this point?
Honestly, this is one of the more interesting parts about the Battle of Britain for me. The fact that they're getting like bombed potentially multiple times a day, maybe like every day of the week in some circumstances, and they're not like cracking under that pressure. I'm sure a lot of people were feeling the pressure at that point for sure, but you have to think like they're putting out the fires, they're dealing with the destruction. You have the potential of like your family home getting destroyed, your friend's family home getting destroyed, and the fact that they're able to keep that resilience and, work to push back the Germans. And of course, the RAF being outnumbered and everything, the fact that they're able to even like push a sort of counteroffensive is really, really fascinating stuff.
Start at the beginning. Waging war on Britain was never one of Hitler's grandiose ambitions. He much preferred to make peace with the British, even offering them the chance to keep their empire in return for aligning themselves with Germany. Some elements of the British government jumped at the possibility to secure a ceasefire, but others, namely Churchill, were not so keen to do so.
Yes,
We
sir.
shall defend our island.
Those that shared Churchill's sentiments ultimately came out on top, and Hitler resolved to force Britain to pursue peace. Shattering British morale was a prerequisite. Since early June, the German Luftwaffe had been launching reconnaissance missions over the British mainland, and in July they began engaging convoys in the English Channel in an effort to hurt British shipping.
No kidding.
On July
I didn't know that.
16th, Hitler and his senior command began planning Operation Sea Lion with the intention of mounting a joint amphibious airborne attack on Britain. Hitler announced
I wonder how common that actually was. I mean, it sounds like a kind of a common sense thing if you have the air superiority to do a landing. I imagine that's what he's talking about, sort of, amphibious landing with the Air Force supports. Yeah, of course, if you have the air superiority, that is something that you should be striving to do. But I wonder how often that actually happened in World War II, to actually be able to have that air superiority while you're actually landing these amphibious forces. But to do something like that in mainland's, United Kingdom, is pretty freaking insane to me. And obviously it didn't work out. But I mean, again, thinking of that happening to the US just seems like mind-boggling, kind of like not something that would happen. But of course, there's a lot of people that need to step up in order to prevent stuff like that from happening.
Announced that, where Napoleon failed, I shall succeed. I shall land on the shores of Britain. Needless to say, the plan was an ambitious one. But up to that point, Nazi Germany had been invincible on the battlefield. The period that followed Hitler's proclamation is known as Spitfire Summer, a fiery clash that pitted more than 1,300 German fighters against just 700 British fighters. Although the British Royal Air Force, or RAF, was almost invariably outnumbered in these skirmishes, the British made effective use of radar. This allowed the RAF to keep its fighters grounded until enemy targets were spotted. They could then be engaged with the benefit of foresight. As a result,
so that's nice because you get the intel, but at the same time, it's nice because you're not having all these vulnerable aircraft kind of flying around for the enemy to potentially spot them and kind of work their own sort of maneuvers.
Luftwaffe pilots often reported that it seemed that the British were always expecting them ahead of time. On the 1st of August, 1940, the Luftwaffe changed their strategy. Up until that point, the German Air Force had mostly focused on targeting British shipping routes and ports in an attempt to starve Britain out. Now it was bent on gaining total air superiority over the RAF, launching upwards of 1,000 attacks a day. Later in the month, the Luftwaffe specifically honed in on RAF airfields and factories that produced aircraft parts. 1,270 German fighters and 520 bombers were directed to what became known as the Eagle attack. But radar once again kept Britain in the fight.
Oh, those numbers seem unreal. 520 bombers. I mean, you have to think, if you don't have the air superiority, the amount of damage that could actually do is, again, unfathomable. Like, that is a lot of aircraft. And, fighting for air superiority is definitely something that you need to maintain. When the Navy's, getting targeted by these aircraft, they're sitting ducks, literally. Like, they need aircraft to actually go and sort of be like a shield to stop these harassing fighters from coming in.
And 520 bombers were directed to what became known as the Eagle attack. But radar once again kept Britain in the fight. The industrial outskirts of London were regularly bombed, but London itself was not to be touched without Hitler's express approval. In retaliation against the German bombing campaign, the RAF Bomber Command conducted night raids that hurt German shipbuilding efforts, making the prospect of a successful German amphibious landing even less viable than it already was, given the British Royal Navy's control of both the English Channel and the North Sea. 80 British bombers were also dispatched to raid the outskirts of Berlin, targeting industrial and commercial targets. But due to cloudiness, some of the bombs fell across the city and resulted in civilian casualties. At this point, Germany was losing the air campaign to the United Kingdom. The Germans did not do as much damage to British production as they suspected. Even by the middle of August, the British were producing double the amount of fighters than the Germans were. Furthermore, German fighters had limited range.
Dude, that's like so crazy to think about, like the logistical push during World War II. I mean, that's why you have things like the grease gun getting manufactured, because they just needed stuff. They needed weapons or armor. They needed stuff very, very quickly. So you had this, like, everybody scrambling to come up with these designs that are effective, but also kind of really easy and quick to manufacture. So I kind of wonder what aircraft, if any, came out of that sort of necessity of them needing these, these aircraft that are easy to build and kind of relatively simple, because you get some very funny looking equipment coming out of World War II because of that reason.
And could only escort bombers flying over Britain for part of their missions. Often this resulted in bombers being left vulnerable and shot down by British fighters. Moreover, since the Luftwaffe was in enemy territory, when an aircraft was shot down, an entire trained crew was lost. If a British plane was shot down, on the other hand, the crew could rejoin the RAF. There had been reported cases of RAF pilots being downed and rejoining the battle on the same day.
That's
Additionally,
badass.
Britain was also able to enlist the aid of experienced pilots from France, Czechoslovakia, and Poland especially. As a consequence of these factors, Hitler delivered a speech in which he denounced Britain and promised retribution to the German people. When the British Air Force drops 2,000 or 3,000 kilograms of bombs, then we will drop in one night 150, 250, 300, or 400,000 kilograms. When they declare that they will increase their attacks on our cities, then we will raise their cities. Sure enough, a bloody revenge followed. Saturday, September 7th, 1940. This was the beginning of the Blitz. Bombs spewed out of aircraft and fell with murderous intensity on London's East End.
Murderous intensity.
There were 430 dead as night edged in, and elsewhere across London, people watched with bemusement. Why, they asked each other, was the sun setting in the east as well as the west? For the next 57 consecutive days, raids continued day and night, causing most people to take solace in air raid shelters. British air raid sirens became a common sound for those living in London and other major cities, but even those...
Now, I've seen a lot of documentaries that sort of show like the whole planning aspect as far as like them picking up stuff on the radar and then sort of planning out all the, you know, the bombers or what have you. That's like a really interesting sort of side story right there. The sort of planning that they had, like, I think it was like underground or something, but they had like that big table, I think. That was really interesting. But something that I haven't seen that much is like the footage of people underground sort of sheltering from this kind of stuff. Because that would be kind of interesting to see the dynamic of, you know, the families that are that terrified kind of going into this shelter. And it's something that you kind of see with the war in Ukraine right now, where people are, you know, sheltering or also just trying to leave the area. You know, it is a very dark and kind of depressing thing to think about. So maybe that's why you don't have a whole lot of footage in those regards, as far as people wanting to record or document that kind of stuff.
Air raid sirens became a common sound for those living in London and other major cities, but even those living in the countryside were not safe. One of the worst incidents to have occurred during the Blitz involved the destruction of a school that was used as an air raid shelter, which resulted in 450 civilian deaths.
Damn.
Some 2,700 Luftwaffe aircrew members had been killed, over 1,000 had been captured, and more than 1,880 German aircraft were shot down.
That is insane.
By comparison, British military casualties numbered some 500 aircrew killed and 60 captured. Throughout the campaign, the RAF was under the able leadership of the resolute and forward-looking Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, who picked his battles wisely. Due to the Luftwaffe's numerical superiority, German planes were not always engaged. Instead, RAF planes were used sparingly to prevent Germany from gaining the air superiority it so desperately needed.
That's kind of an interesting thing as well. That's something that I see in a lot of other countries when you're doing like simple things like CQB tactics, where they really focus more on self-preservation and not necessarily being like super fast and dynamic. And it sounds like that's kind of what the RAF, the sort of mentality that they were adapting. But I want to do some research about him. If there's any cool videos that you guys can recommend about him, definitely throw it down below, because I've probably seen his name somewhere, but it's not something that has stuck in my memory.
Prevent Germany from gaining the air superiority it so desperately needed to defeat Britain. The commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, Hermann Göring, is considered by most historians to have been the inferior air commander. And although many consider him to be Dowding's equal in resolve, Göring lacked Dowding's strategic foresight and innovative mindset. The Battle of Britain is generally considered a watershed moment in the Second World War, culminating in Nazi Germany's first major military defeat. Hitler's decision to put his invasion of the United Kingdom on hold and turn east to invade the Soviet Union was born largely out of a growing need for oil to fuel the German war machine. The decision gave Britain precious time to rebuild its military following Allied defeat in continental Europe. It also served to sway public opinion in the United States at a time when the vast majority of Americans opposed joining the struggle in Europe. We'll conclude by quoting Winston Churchill, who upon reflecting on the confrontation eloquently asserted that,
"Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few."
Wow, well said. Right there. Jeez.
And now back to our sponsor. War Thunder is
Okay, that was a very insightful video. But with all of these, insightful videos, I often leave the videos wanting to do research about like 5 other topics, which is great because it really fuels my interest in these sorts of things. And again, a lot of the info will stick, some of it won't, so I will have to sort of brush up on certain things. But again, I do appreciate you guys sort of adding a lot of that sort of filler or background information or that context down in the comment section for stuff that we're seeing in the video. Because of course, it's one person's video, but when you have a whole community of people coming together with all this knowledge, it is really awesome to see the kind of insight we can get for something, especially something as comprehensive as the Battle of Britain. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, the Battle of Britain wasn't terribly long, but you have to imagine there was a lot going on in those few months that it was actually going down. And again, you guys do a great job of adding a lot of that context as far as different stages or different mindsets, different pieces of information that we can't get in just one video unless it's like, 5 hours long or what have you, and they do, years worth of research. So I do appreciate you guys adding that sort of personal perspective, some of that knowledge that you guys have picked up on. But yeah, it's great. It's great to sort of inform our community, which again is like the best part of having a channel like this, is to be able to, learn it myself and kind of have y'all learn it by proxy, watching me watch it, but also getting a lot of that, third-hand knowledge from everybody else and that coming together in one area. It's very, very cool. But hopefully you guys enjoyed. I definitely enjoyed this one. Again, it is one of their older videos, but, it holds up very, very well. But yeah, that is it for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you did, of course, hit that thumbs up, all of that good stuff. But thank you again for watching. Thank you for commenting and subscribing. That is it for this video. I'll see you on the next one.